Didn't get everything you wanted this holiday season? Spring Creek Model Trains can help. With a huge inventory featuring today's top manufacturers, Spring Creek Model Trains is sure to have just what you're looking for. Check them out in Deschler, Nebraska, on their website, springcreekmodeltrains.com, or come shop their huge selection at the Railroad Hobby Show in the Stroh Building, January 24th and 25th in West Springfield, Massachusetts. Or give them a call at 402-365-7628. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, the place to go is the Railroad Hobby Show in West Springfield, Massachusetts to see Tully models. You'll find Kevin in the Mallory Building with a wide variety of products from Industrial Modeler Supply and Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply, including new announcements to take your trackside industries to the next level. For more, check out their website at tullymodels.com. The railroad that inspired a generation can now be a part of your collection. Home Shops is proud to offer Rapido General Electric C36-7 locomotives featuring the legendary paint scheme of Tony Custer's Allegheny Midland. Home Shops has combined the amazing quality of Rapido trains with the storied freelance railroad you grew up with. This limited edition run features 2 road numbers and is available in DCC sound or DC silent while supplies last. Bring the Allegheny Midland home to your layout. Order today at homeshops.net. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. Joining me from Alabama, Radisson McGuire. Radisson, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Ray.
Great to see you again. I think we have to go back to Colorado. Last time I saw you at the Colorado RPM and the freelance forum and all the really cool stuff that was going on out in Greeley.
You know, we have a habit of running into each other at RPMs here. You know, if it's not St. Louis, it's Colorado. What's next? Macon?
Perhaps. Macon's probably a good one. Probably a local one for you, or fairly local. I would say probably closer than Colorado and St. Louis, right?
Yeah, it's only about 2 hours versus a 26-hour car ride for Colorado. But yeah, it was fun. Had a blast.
Yeah, you made that a road trip, right? You came out with Hank Stevens, is that right?
Yeah, Hank Stevens drove over from West Point to Montgomery and picked me up after work, and then we drove through the night to pick up Joe Bohannon over in Fort Worth and drove yet again through the day and night straight into Colorado.
Awesome. Must have been a lot of fun, a lot of great conversations in that buggy as you were heading across the country.
I tell you, Joe's a bad influence. I love him. But he's put all these ideas in my head. They were just rocking around going, oh, man, I could actually afford to do this now. Maybe I need to.
Well, that's great. And a great trip out there. And then, of course, we get to the Colorado RPM, and that's what's really special. And, you know, you hear me talk a lot about RPMs here on the podcast and the reunion, right? It's like a reunion of sorts. We've seen each other in St. Louis. A little time goes by. Then we go see each other all in Colorado. And then perhaps there's others that are on the circuit that we get to go hang out with each other again. But it gets those ideas flowing and the flywheels turning, and the exchange of ideas is just incredible.
So, you know, what's interesting about that is, of course, Hank lives pretty much right up the road from me. So we've known each other for years. But Joe Bohannon and I actually go back to our days in the Teen Association of Model Railroaders. That's how we met. And this was pre-Facebook. So we've known each other since we were both teenagers.
Wow.
And to have that kind of lifelong friendship with Joe was great. And then, you know, Dan Archer did a clinic on the West Falls Northern at Colorado, and he and I pretty much talk weekly about something. And of course, we're, you know, if you look at us on the freelance spectrum, we're kind of polar opposites, where he's in the 70s. I'm modern. He likes Alcos. I like EMD. But, you know, we're very similar in the prototype heavy phase of concepts and logo design and everything like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also, when you find like-minded people, we're going to get into your philosophy on short line freelancing a bit later. I'm really looking forward to having that conversation. But before we leave Colorado RPM,
one of the things that I was able to catch, and I just thought it was cool and kind of encapsulated, at least for me, the spirit of the Colorado RPM, was watching you sit across the table from Tony Sissons. Now, we got two pretty separated generations where we're not picking on Tony, because really Tony is like the youngest 80-something-year-old I've ever met in my life. But vast difference in ages, but sitting there just sharing ideas, sharing theory and concept and technique. And that's what's really cool about it. It really covers a wide gamut of the demographic of our hobby and people coming together to be able to share it.
Tony's a great friend. Yet again, he is like you said, the youngest 80-something-year-old out there. And I've followed Tony's work since I was a kid. He wrote it was a book on the super detailing in SW 1500. And that kind of got me hooked on his work. And the first time I'd met him was at the first Macon RPM about 3 years ago. And the first time we met, we just hit it off, and we just started, of course, Tony having that heavy accent. I said, Tony, tell me these curse words in your accent. So we just start cursing each other. And I said, Tony, speak English. Please just speak proper Southern English. You live in the South, for God's sakes. and we've become friends. We've been good friends ever since. But it's kind of surreal, Ray, that growing up, of course, I followed the early days of the RPMs. Early days of St. Louis, Tony's work, Bob Harp's work, and Butch Idler. Butch is extremely talented. And I always thought, man, I'm never going to be as good as these guys. These guys are the absolute best, and they're only getting better. And then Tony is asking me how I managed to get one of my Berlin Mills cars to look the way it did, and what products I'm using. And he's now looking into using some of the stuff I use. And it's just sharing those ideas with each other. That's what it's all about.
Oh, that's really awesome. And yeah, really special to be able to sit there and then, guys that you looked up to now getting information from you. And that's what the RPM is about. It's not just one person that knows everything. It's a bunch of people who know a bunch of different things and being able to share them.
Yeah. And that's kind of what the RPM is all about in all reality. Like you said, no one is better than the other. And we are there to learn. That has been the purpose of an RPM since day one, is to learn. It's not a contest, where you might walk away kind of with your tail tucked between your legs thinking, oh, wow, I'm not as good as I think I am. You can always get better.
So speaking of learning, let's talk a little bit about you getting started in this hobby and learning it. Talk about where this all began for you, Radisson.
So I need a quick disclaimer to your viewers or listeners in this case. I've got permission to tell the story, so no one needs to freak out. I am not from Alabama. I'm from Pensacola, Florida. And for those of you who know the Pensacola, Florida area, it had some really great hobby shops back in the day, and unfortunately they're all gone now. And even some really great railroading back in the day, and unfortunately that's all gone now. But back in the 90s, when my mother found out she was going to have me, she quit drinking cold turkey and enrolled in AA, and that takes a lot with anyone. And to this day, she's never had a drink. But where they had AA in Pensacola, or one of the places, was this kind of nondescript 3-story building right next door to the CSX tracks. And when I say right next door, you could walk out and you're within 5 feet of the rail. So young Rad, sitting on the couch while my mother's in a meeting with everyone else, and I'd hear the gates going down, the building would start to rumble, and I'd hear the horn. I'd beg anyone willing to take a smoke break to take me outside to watch the trains. And I was just fascinated with it. And those were the real trains. And I didn't know what a model train was. This was 90, 94, 95. And about this time every year, Christmas, Thanksgiving, that area timeline, St. Anne's Church in Pensacola would do the St. Anne's Christmas Lights Festival. And they, it was just what you think it would be. There's a lot of Christmas lights, vendor stalls, Christmas caroling, stuff like that. But the only thing I cared about was the one vendor stall that had a model train layout in it. The first time I'd ever seen a layout. I had no idea what it was. I just saw O scale and S scale and G scale trains running in all these different loops, the sight, the sound. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. So, of course, every chance I got, I was begging my family for a model train. I had no idea what scale I wanted. No, I had no idea what I wanted to model. But the first thing they had ever bought me was a Tyco Santa Fe F7. And I guess for a 3 or 5 year old, a Tyco F7 is the perfect thing to start with. So I thought that was the greatest model ever, and I've still got it. It's sitting on my shelf in my workstation. So that's the one thing. It's a piece of junk. It's broken. The shell's cracked. The horns are gone. It wasn't even pad printed decal. They were stickers. They did all the Santa Fe war bonnet logos were all stickers on this engine. So the engine probably came from the 80s, if that. But yeah, that's what got me into it, was just seeing a model train for the first time and being around the real ones too, because every house we've ever lived in, we've been within earshot of the tracks. Whether it was the Gunner Industrial Park branch or Columbus, Georgia, or we had a hobby shop not far from us when we lived in Birmingham. So I've always kind of been exposed to the hobby, but it was kind of slow and just cascaded from there.
It's kind of interesting because you're a younger generation. Usually your generations, I guess, maybe lifelike. I mean, there's like a separation of generations by the model railroad products they started with, right? Got the older folks with Lionel and American Flyer, and then my generation's like the Tyco generation, right? The 80s, but you skip back a generation with something older, so you got the 80s start to things with Tyco, and I bet you still think that locomotive's pretty awesome even in its current state.
Every now and again I look at it and I'm like, one of these days I got to fix that thing. One of these days, I'm going to see if I can fix it and make it look like I had it brand new out of the box. But that's another future project once I don't have 50 items on my work table.
Yeah, which would probably be a long time because it seems like you got a lot of projects going there. But so talk about, you said Pensacola, Florida, obviously life altering, amazing, and congratulations to your mother for making some really awesome life changing decisions that obviously affected you in multiple ways, including exposing you to the railroad, which is really cool. And that, kind of sparked off an interest that's carried with you today. How do you end up from Pensacola to, you mentioned Georgia and Birmingham, Alabama? Talk about kind of your exposure and, as you work your way to even like your teenage years or where you are now.
So we left Pensacola, moved to Montgomery, and we were in Montgomery for a couple of years. And my father at the time was working for the Home Depot, and he was one of their regional forklift safety training guys or whatever. And we would have to go to different different regions in the Southeast to help with that. And we ended up in Columbus for about a year and a half or so. And after Columbus, we decided that we would move to Birmingham. And then my mom and dad unfortunately got divorced, shortly after that, and we moved back to Montgomery. So no matter what, I always kind of found my way back into Montgomery. And when I was 4, I unfortunately got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which that you're talking life altering. That was life altering.
Yeah.
But they took me to Children's Hospital in Birmingham, and I was there for I couldn't even tell you how long I was there. Getting tested and poked and prodded and childhood trauma and all that fun stuff. But one of the cool things was my room overlooked the crossover point where CSX crosses the AGS south for Norfolk Southern, and then you could also see the Amtrak stations. I would just be watching trains all day. If I wasn't playing with Hot Wheel cars in my bed, I was watching the trains out the window, and I couldn't even tell you what I was seeing because we were, the distance, you couldn't make out you just knew you were watching a CSX or Norfolk Southern train from the colors. But that right there just kind of cemented it. And then we get back to Montgomery, and my birthday rolls around, and my mom took me to Train Masters of Montgomery. It was the only model train store here. And she took me down the aisles and she said, you can pick out any model train set you want, except for G scale, Z scale, and O scale, which of course only left me in an HO. So I chose HO, and my first train set was a Walthers mainline train set. It was a CSX Cheap 9 chop nose with a couple of you're around the mill, train set, couple of freight cars, a caboose, and a loop of track. And then about a week later, my grandma takes me in there and she buys me a switch and a couple of pre-built model power structures that had little like incandescent bulbs in them that probably got too hot and melted the buildings at some point. And I had this 4x8 plywood prairie Empire that my granddad had crudely spray painted green to simulate grass. And that was the extent of my model train set for a number of years, because we always rented houses. So we were moving from house to house every few years. And then when I got into my high school, I finally sat down. I was like, I actually want to build a layout, but I don't know how I want to go about doing it. And I joined the Teen Association of Model Railroaders my freshman year of high school, met Joe Bohannon from the Chinook lines, and that's how we became pretty much lifelong friends, and a number of other people. And he said, yeah, you should go to a train show and rep the TAMR, because I see you've got train shows in Georgia, Alabama, and they'll pay you to go. And I said, oh, cool, yeah, let's do it. So I ended up building like a 4-foot by 5-foot layout, kind of based around the Birmingham, Bessemer area, with a little like part of the steel mill and kind of the ghetto looking dilapidated downtown structures. And that layout went everywhere. It went all over the Southeast for about 4 or 5 years. And then finally it just fell apart. It just, after about 5 years of traveling in the back of a truck, it just said, no, I'm just done.
Yeah, it got high mileage and came apart. How did you discover the Teen Association of Model Railroaders?
It was in an old issue of RMC, believe it or not. I saw an ad for them, and I said, oh, what is that? Because I'd been in the NMRA for a number of years, but to be completely honest, I never got anything out of it. So I dropped the membership. And the TAMR, I was like, wow, it's run by teens, for teens. Oh, let me see what this is all about. Maybe I can find people like me in the area. And sure enough, I was quickly kind of promoted to the Southeastern rep. And I realized, oh no, I'm the only teenager in this group in the Southeast. I got to change that. And I think I got the membership down here was 0 when I started. And I got us up to about 10 or 12 within a period of like 4 years. And I was just going to train shows, because just like myself, not getting anything out of the local clubs, other teens felt the same thing, because they saw teenagers as, oh, we know we're trouble. No, we just want to mess with model trains. We didn't really care what else was going on in life. We just want to build model trains and hang out and learn from the old guys. But yeah, it was really cool. And unfortunately, that group, after all of us aged out, it just kind of fizzled out and died, which really was disappointing to a lot of us. That we were kind of the last generation in the TAMR, but we still got the memories, and a lot of us still keep in touch with each other.
You mentioned that you went to Train Masters of Montgomery. You had a shop in the area, and then of course the Teen Association of Model Railroaders. Where were you learning your skills and techniques from in that era?
It was all trial and error, to be honest with you. We would be going through Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or something, and I'd see an issue of Model Railroader magazine, and that was a luxury that, I wasn't able to buy the magazines, back then, but I could look through them and kind of see pictures and everything, and I'd see that, that they weathered something. How do you do that? And I'd look through my grandmother's craft paints, and I'd say, oh, wow, that birch sienna looks like rust. Or that brown kind of looks like okay, let's see. And I couldn't tell you how many trains I probably ruined thinking rubbing oil pastels for rush streaks was a good idea. No one do that. Disclaimer, no one do rub oil pastels on your locomotives. It's a bad idea. But yeah, it was all trial and error. And then the era of YouTube came about. And oh God, Ray, YouTube is, you're talking about a game changer. That right there.
Mm.
Once people start putting how-to weathering videos out there and tours of their layouts and how they do little things here and there, that just opened up the doors for me, because I had no idea what a powder pastel was, or I had no idea what dull coat was, or, I kind of knew what an airbrush was, but I didn't know you could use it for weathering. I just thought it was used for painting, period. And it was just, learning slowly was always, it is a challenge for a lot of people. But then going to trade shows too kind of taught me more about local prototypes, and starting to learn about going out and rail fanning, taking photos of what you want to model and what interests you, so you have that reference to go back to later.
Let's talk about some of the prototypes that were around you that were influencing you.
Oh wow, that would have been the Birmingham Southern was a huge one, and that was a U.S. Steel subsidiary short line up in the Birmingham area. As soon as I got my driver's license, I went crazy taking photos of that railroad. All the crews knew me. The upper management knew me. Unfortunately, U.S. Steel Police Department knew me and in great detail. And I got in trouble a few times with them about taking photos and corporate espionage and all that fun stuff. But it was, boy. Yeah. And then, of course, the 9/11 excuse got popped out at me more times than I care to admit. But, I always did it in a safe way. I was always on a road. I was never on the tracks, never on equipment. But yeah, it was either Birmingham Southern or CSX was a huge one, because that's all we have in Montgomery is CSX. And, rail fanning CSX, you just kind of get sick and tired of seeing it after a while. There are certain things that, okay, if I see it coming down the tracks, I'm going to take a photo of it. If I see a couple of SD40-2s leading a manifest, I'm chasing it, especially in today's era. But oh God, here comes another Tier 4 Gevo. I don't care about that. I'm more inclined to take photos of the rolling stock now than I am the full locomotive roster shot. And then we have little short lines, scattered throughout the region. You got the Meridian and Big B, the Bay Line, Autauga Northern, railroads like that. ATN was a railroad that I started rail fanning after Birmingham Southern, and I'd found them by mistake. We were going after Southern 630 when it was in Birmingham doing a steam excursion, and stumbled across a Southern Pacific tunnel motor leading a manifest freight on some of the worst trackage I'd ever seen in my life. And I said, what railroad is this? ATN, what the heck is ATN? And I think I looked in my Google Drive the other night. I think I'm pushing 15,000 photos.
Amazing.
From just Alabama in general. And if it's not military photos from DOD trains, it's just, I've got everything in certain way, like EMD, GE stuff, then, railroad specific items, rolling stock, maintenance away, structures, model reference photos. And it's helped me continue my hobby and help me get better in what I need, because weathering reference photos are some of the best things you can invest in.
Yeah, for sure. And, capturing what you see, we talk about that quite often, and keep shooting, because you're capturing a golden era of somebody's. And I'm sure we go back through your 15,000 photos that you've captured some golden era, maybe things that you can't see anymore. And they're gold to you, and they're certainly gold to a lot of other people. Do you find that you're like me, rail fanning costs you money? It doesn't cost you to go out there and do it, and you've already owned the camera. It's when you start to see things, and then that ideal list starts to build.
Yeah, it's bad. I think the worst one I had was my buddy Cameron and I, we decided, it was a couple of years ago. We were like, let's go down to the hobby shop in Enterprise. It's about an hour and a half drive from Montgomery. And so we get to the High Country Hobbies just to find out that they are on vacation for the week.
Oh, no.
And I looked at my buddy and I was like, man, we drove all the way down here. We are within spitting distance of Dothan, Alabama. I want to go photograph the Bay Line. So we drove to Dothan, and I said, well, we're down in Dothan. We might as well drive to Panama City. So we drove to Panama City, stopped in Cottondale, Florida. and that's where the CSX crosses the Bay Line on a diamond. And there's a little like way freight depot from the Bay Line. It's sitting in the weeds back kind of in the woods. And I looked in the area, started taking photos, and I said, I got in the truck and I said, I know what I'm building next. I'm going to build Cottondale, Florida to scale in N scale. And I'm going to do it in Fremo so I can take it to train shows and go to a big Fremo meet and run 150 car trains over the diamond, because that's what I want to see. And I did it. I built, my buddy Glenn and I built we designed the depot in CAD. He printed it on his little FDM printer, and for N-Scale it worked. And we drew it out in like Extract CAD, and we figured that once we had all the four modules together, we were only about 20 feet shy of it being 100% to scale.
Oh, nice.
With the entire track layout. And the only thing that threw a wrench in the system was the diamond wasn't a 90. I had to use a 90-degree diamond, and the prototype diamond was like an 86 or an 87 degree. It was some weird one-off diamond that is nowhere else in the world, and no model train company is ever going to offer that in N-Scale of all things. And I tracked down, Atlas did Bayline GP38s at one point, tracked down all those numbers, put sound and DCC in them, and I had it. And I sold the modules, said to a buddy of mine up in Birmingham, he wanted them. So he got those from me, but that goes back to, it's all because we did that little trip. I spent too much money into the Bayline.
Yeah, I'm seeing that when I go out and rail fan, you start to see cars and locomotives that you hadn't seen before, and then they pique an interest, and you start going down that, whether if you want to call it a wormhole or a rabbit hole or whatever you want to call it, it's amazing. And then next thing you know, it's like, all right, who makes this, or who makes a car that's close to this? So it's wild. My project box keeps growing every time I go trackside, and it sounds like it's kind of the same problem for you too. If you want to call it a problem, there's certainly worse problems out there than collecting rolling stock, waiting to do something to it.
The worst one, I think the most expensive, and that's how I kind of became infamous at St. Louis RPM, was the military modeling. In 2020, all of us are cooped up in the house. None of us can go anywhere. Unfortunately, unfortunately, I was working the entire time and had all this overtime, the crazy amounts of overtime, working in, TV and all that fun stuff. But I started getting notifications from rail fans that there were more and more military trains coming through Montgomery. And they were, of course, the conspiracy theorists are like, oh, martial law is coming. Oh, no, it's not martial law. Uh-huh. They're going to the National Training Center down in Camp Shelby or out west. They were just rerouting a bunch of DOD stuff through Montgomery because there's some derailment, on one of the other lines. So I went out there and I just started taking photos of everything. And yet again, getting up close and personal with an M1 Abrams or Humvee, I said, I've got to build some of this. Someone's got to make good HO scale models of this. And sure enough, I discovered Roco mini tanks, Arsenal MR models, and I ordered all this stuff specialty from Germany right before the lockdown. And I got word that they're gonna stop shipping packages from Germany because of COVID. And I'm thinking, oh God, I'm not going to be getting any of my stuff. And sure enough, this huge crate shows up on my doorstep, and I've got like 150, 200 models in this crate. Holy and I just start building. And there's a photo, I think it's on the St. Louis RPM website from 2021 of you just see it like 4 tables, and it's just nothing but military trucks and tanks and stuff, and no rail cars. And that was just me building for an entire year. I'd get off work and I'd build for 4 or 5 hours. I'd be off 2 or 3 days. I'd build for 12 hours. And that's all I did for the lockdown, was build military trains and military models. And I think I built everything with the exception of the Patriot missile defense system, because I could never find a model of it. That's the only thing that stopped me, was I just couldn't find a model of it.
Talk about the diversification there, where you were, instead of doing model railroading stuff, you were doing tanks. How did that help you in your modeling journey and learning? That must have been something really unique or something new that you've learned from that.
It kind of taught me a little bit more on the weathering, because when you get up next to tanks, they do, from far away they look new, but I kind of learned tank A in the NATO woodland camouflage is different from this tank B, which is also in NATO woodland camouflage, but that green is fading differently. And that kind of taught me, okay, well, they all need to look, they need to look the same, but they also need to look different in little details here and there. And that also taught me more into the finer detailing of things, focusing more on tracks and a form of rivet counting. And it also taught me how to not just work in plastic, but metal or pewter metal and the old spin cast resin, because a lot of these specialty kits were in spin cast resin, and it's got a block 2 inches thick of resin underneath the chassis. You got to cut that thing off. And I also learned you need to do that outside, because if you do that inside, that resin dust is going to get everywhere. And I do mean everywhere.
Yeah, sometimes education's expensive. But I mean, prior to that, I mean, just learning all these new things, I bet you didn't even know what NATO woodland camo was prior to this project, did you?
I didn't know that there were specific color tones. I think the first time I did it, I bought a shade of brown and a shade of black in a bottle at Hobby Lobby, and then I bought a rattle can of olive drab green Rust-Oleum camouflage paint at Home Depot, and I was spray painting models because I didn't have an airbrush at the time. So it was that learning curve, because I went from heavy spray paint use to an airbrush within the span of a couple of months.
Wow. Like you definitely put your head down and did a lot of learning in that pandemic time.
Yeah, it was one of the few things that was good coming of it. And the rail fanning was great too, because chasing trains was easier. No one's on the road. Trains are still running. Yeah. Gas prices were cheap. Insurance was cheap. And my friends and I, we went everywhere, all throughout the Southeast and rail fan. We had our bucket list of short lines that we wanted to go shoot, and we shot every single one of them.
Talk about good rail fanning buddies. I know they're hard to come by. You got to have somebody with the right mentality. It sounds like your buddies definitely have that right mentality. They're not the ones that are like show up, and if they don't see a train in 5 minutes, they want to move on. They get it, right? You got to have those kinds of guys. Yeah,
I think my rail fanning go-to buddy is Josh Singletary. He and I have had the weirdest luck rail fanning. We go out expecting nothing, and we see so much great stuff. And we've kind of learned too, it's opened the doors to do so much cool stuff. He and I got an invite to go to the BNSF yard in Birmingham to go photograph a youth sheriff's event that they were doing out there. The BNSF police officer who heads up that region's friends with us, and he called us up and said, yeah, if you're in town, come on out. We'll give you free food and tour of a locomotive, and you see the yard, and we'll drive you through the yard, and we'll try to get into the tower and all that. And we did that, and then a couple of months later, we got invited to go ride the employee excursion special for BNSF. Wow. And
amazing.
We've gotten inside the Birmingham Southern shops. We just kind of walked up and talked to the GM, and they let us in and let us walk around and photograph in a safe environment, safe controlled environment and all that. And it's rail fanning with him is interesting. God help me if he ever gets on this podcast and talks about the St. Louis time, because I took him into an area of St. Louis I shouldn't have taken him into. So that was crazy, and that was one of the only times I said, oh, we should not be here.
There's that's the one thing you got to remember about railroads, and when you're out rail fanning, sometimes railroads don't go through the best neighborhoods. They don't go through the best areas and necessarily the safest areas. So you definitely got to have a heads up for that. But always great to be able to share. Say on the podcast, the hobby is always better shared. Well, that goes with rail fanning too. Have somebody to hang out with. We did it at Milton Landing Park with a group of listeners this past fall. Had a great time with that. And it's just great. I mean, in between trains, there's so many conversations, so many ideas being shared and passion being shared. Just a really cool thing to be able to do. And I'm sure that not only were you talking about the prototype, it was maybe cementing some model railroading ideas as well, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, Josh is a model railroader just like me. I mean, he does the L&N from the 70s up right till the Family Lines era, and he's one of the best modelers I know. But what's funny is I think the one time that he and I were dangerously close to making something a reality was, what would it take for us to open up a hobby shop? A good hobby shop that could survive in this day and age, in this climate. We just started throwing ideas back and forth to each other. And before we knew it, we'd been talking to each other about this and had a notebook filled with ideas and what we would need and how much money we would have to spend. And it got to the point where I started kind of looking into, okay, well, how much money would I need to spend with Horizon Hobbies? How much money would I need to spend with Intermountain or Scale Trains or Atlas and Walthers, and would, what brands would we focus on? Would we focus on one scale, and what would we call the shop? Where would we open it? And it got really dangerously close. And every now and again, we kind of joke, hey, that's how we almost opened up a hobby shop with each other. How bad an idea that would have probably been for us.
Well, you know what they say, you want to make a small fortune in model railroading, start with a big fortune.
Yeah.
You may have started to figure that math out, but yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great that you even just to run the theory or be able to sit there with a notepad. I've got friends that we do that, we'll dream, we'll share ideas, we'll run it. And it sounds like you got a great group of friends helping you support not only the rail fanning, but the model railroading as well. So going from teen association to model railroaders with zero, you've definitely gone well beyond that and built yourself a great group of friends down there in the Alabama area.
Oh yeah. And it's not just Alabama, it's all over. I mean, I've got friends in, like up there towards you and Massachusetts, Vermont, Colorado, Texas, it's all over the place now. And it's all because I've gone to like these RPMs and these train shows and done YouTube for a brief stint and Facebook and all that fun stuff. You just meet all these great people, and sometimes they give you really good bad ideas, and other times they talk you out of doing something stupid.
Yeah, there's a little bring you back down to earth a little bit too. That's definitely a benefit. So you've been talking quite a bit about the Birmingham Southern and the influence there. Now, it would seem to me, based on the influence that you have and the access that you have, that the Birmingham Southern would be a great railroad to model, but I don't think you modeled that, did you?
I actually did at one point. I did build a 4x8 Birmingham Southern layout, and I did that right before my buddy Scott passed away. Scott, for those from the Birmingham area knew Scott Fedoza. He lived literally right behind the Birmingham Southern main line. And U.S. Steel and BS hated us because we clear-cut the property right back to the tracks and built a deck. So we could just watch their hot metal trains move past, which, they hated doing that. And they got to the point they'd moved the hot metal trains from operating during the day to operating at night just so we couldn't take a photo.
Oh, really?
And we responded with floodlights everywhere.
We can fix that problem.
We fixed that problem. But Atlas did a pair of Birmingham Southern MP15s and HONN, and of course, I think Scott and I bought half the stock they had. We went crazy just buying end cap switchers, and he got decals made through microscale, and when he passed, we kind of, just to keep his memory alive, I built a Birmingham Southern, Fairfield Southern themed steel mill layout for the Southeastern region in a Mare show that was coming up. And it was there and had it on display. And I had some LEDs on within the structures. And I was getting kind of a little bit more advanced in detailing and structure building. And I had a gentleman walk up to me who worked for U.S. Steel, and he says, I'll give you XYZ amount of money for this. And I said, sold. Wow. I don't have to take it back to Montgomery now.
Yeah, there you go. Win-win. There you go.
This will fund a new layout.
There you go.
So the Birmingham Southern has been modeled, and I still do some modeling with the BS. I kind of keep that one under wraps a little more. But I worked with Kevin Tully with there's a specialty car he offers on his website. It's the TC&I coil car is what it's classified as. But everyone who sees it says, "Oh, that's that's built off an old Norfolk and Western battleship gondola." And they were home built cars back in the 40s. Tennessee Coal and Iron built about 12 of these covered gondolas on Buckeye trucks, and they spent their entire working life within the mill. They never left. And we have no blueprints. The blueprints got destroyed in a flood back in the late 90s. All the cars have been scrapped. All we had were a couple of photos I'd taken and some Google Earth satellite views where we could take the little Google Earth measuring tape and measure how long the car was, because we never knew how long the cars were. And Kevin turned around and made the car, and now it's on his website.
Amazing.
So I've got a couple of those cars coming to me. I'm going to do a couple of those for St. Louis this year.
Again, going back to those photos, you never know how they're going to pay off. Just keep snapping photos. It's amazing what they could eventually provide to not only you, but the entire hobby, because now Kevin's got that car available. I'm sure there's more folks like you that have seen them and want to model it.
Yeah, that's the best advice I've got to give to anyone wanting to even either continue or get better in the hobby, is just go out and take as many photos as you can of as many things as you can, because you never know when it's going to go. Whether it's a trackside structure, a locomotive, or rolling stock. We're in a very interesting era here, Ray, that we're now within a year of a lot of rolling stock getting scrapped. Pullman Standard 4750 covered hoppers, those are hitting their 50-year mark within the next year or two. Those will all get scrapped. The Pullman Standard 5477 box cars and the waffle side box cars, those were built in the 70s. Those are about to get be gone. And we're going to be stuck with these Trinity 50 and 60 foot high cubes for the next 60 years. So photograph it while you can and get what you can too. I mean, I recommend if you see rail cars getting scrapped in a scrapyard, find whoever owns that scrapyard and ask, "Hey, can I get that sign off that auto rack?" Because that Conrail sign or that Southern Pacific sign, once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
You're never be able to get it again. Then you're looking on eBay seeing that, oh, that sign's going for $2,000. I don't have that right now.
No, I don't either for a sign. I got a place to put it. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing collectibles, and you've got me on such a kick. I'm going to blame you, and we'll do it publicly, about IPD cars. And, we're talking about that when we, incentive per diem, for those that don't know IPD, this amazing era where all these short lines had cars that would have never fit back on their lines. But the amazing patchwork that these have created across the rail network, especially now with them repatched. And I just love diving in and just figuring out, what was that car? What was it? What is that logo that's half bleeding through? And I blame you, because I saw a lot of your patchwork and the stuff that you've been up to. And then I start to catch it when I'm out rail fanning. And now I've got a whole bin of stuff over here that I've got to figure out how to do. And talk about that and, some of the patchwork you're doing in IPD cars.
Yeah, the IPD era in the Southeast, oh man, we were known for IPD cars down here. And New Orleans, Public Bell, Terminal Railway of Alabama, all of them had IPD cars at one point. And to me, the IPD era is the rainbow era of the railroads. The colorful, flashy paint schemes, big logos, and those were just some of the coolest cars to see. And as you said, once they start getting up there in age and they've gone through 4 or 5 different owners, every owner's going to do their own patch to it, and the car's not going to get repainted. Or if it gets painted, it's that ugly BKTY brown that's obvious house paint that after about a year of going through rain and dust and whatever, the paint is flaking and the original paint's showing through. So that is something that always interested me. And that's something I always said, if I ever started my own railroad, I'm focusing heavy into the per diem cars. That's what I want. And that was something that, I wanted the old Pullman Standard cars and the Berlin Mills cars and some of the FMC cars. because that stuff I still see tons of here. But for me, what really sets it all aside for me is it was an excuse to model waffle side boxcars.
Yes.
without modeling Norfolk Southern or Southern, because I was like, okay, they're selling those cars off. I could finally get some. Now I got an excuse to buy as many waffle side box cars as I want, because those were just the coolest looking cars. There's probably 18 or 19 different variants of them out there. And I could go through the boxcar rabbit hole with you. But that's what I'm hunting now. When I go out rail fanning, if I see a Berlin Mills car and it's within clear line of sight, I'm photographing it.
Well, thanks to you, I'm doing the same thing. I'm dropping the drone in on the DeWitt yard and out in Conklin and in Binghamton and just all over the place. Just every time I see one of these IPD cars, I do two things. I think of Radisson McGuire, and then I think of getting that photo and capturing it, because somewhere there's got to be a prototype for the original car. And once I do some digging and figure out what that bleeding logo is, I'm going to be able to put it in my project box. And someday I'll be able to sit here and put some weathering on it and get it to looking like the prototype. But at least grabbing that photo right now. And that's the key part, right? Grab the photo. They're going to make those cars. They're going to continue to make those cars in production, but they're not going to make, as far as the model side, but as far as the prototype, like you said, they're going away. Grab them now.
Yeah. Once they're gone, they're gone. And what's cool is you find LRS 5850, that number, and you only get one side of it. You look it up online and you see someone else got all these other angles, and you see the weathering change over like a year or two, and the graffiti and even the patchwork change.
Yeah.
It just gives you so many more ideas on what you can do.
Or the fact that both sides aren't patched the same way. Like side, they patched it and maybe, said LRS and it was a white background with black lettering. And then the other side, something completely different. So it's so unique. And what's fun for a model railroader, you weather them both ways, or you patch them the two different ways. And when that car gets turned, it looks like a totally different car because it's patched completely different. So it really is wild to see, both sides and capture the whole thing if you can.
What gets me too is how, when they patch the cars, how kind of haphazardly they decal the cars. Because as model railroaders, when we go to decal a locomotive, you want the decals perfectly straight.
Yeah. But
Especially Isaac, with him being so OCD about decaling and proper decal placement. But when you get into the per diem cars and the patch outs, I've seen cars that the lettering is just so crooked, or it's one letter is a different font from all the other letters. So God help you if you're really OCD about your decals. Those aren't the cars you're going to want.
Right. Or you got to break up a decal set and get a couple letters and don't it's like perfectly imperfect, right? You just got to get it to that point where they've made those a little bit of, not everything's perfectly lined up. The patches aren't necessarily always lined up. There's a little bit of overbleed and everything else. So really, really cool stuff.
There was a weathering, I called my Bob Ross moment, and it was just a happy little accident. And I dull coated a per diem car. I'd airbrushed the patchwork to it, went ahead and took it outside, shot it with some Tamiya dull coat, and some kind of weird reaction happened with the paint and the Tamiya rattle can dull coat, and it cracked the paint down to the original paint. I'm not sure how it did it. It's some kind of chemical reaction. But I sat there, I sat back and I was like, you know what, that looks pretty cool. I've seen this on rail cars before. Yeah. I'm not even going to fix it. We'll just call it a happy little accident.
Nice. Happy little accident. Nice. I like that. Let's dive into the Alabama Central, because we'd be remiss not to mention that. That's the railroad that you're now known for, your freelance railroad. And I love your approach. And let's talk about that. Let's talk about where the idea for the Alabama Central was born.
So the Alabama Central was it's kind of a weird story. It started with me complaining at the model train club I was in with some friends. I got sick and tired of operating my buddy's CSX locomotives in the yard. Every time I got put on yard duty, I got sick and tired of it. So I found a couple of in-cab switchers and created the Alabama Central just to kind of, we live in Alabama. We kind of in central Alabama. So, okay, it's Alabama Central it is. We had no logo, no nothing. It was just spray paint, stencil lettering on the long hood, and that was it. Well, we left the train club in 2020. There was some differentiating views between us and the older members, and we just decided it was best that we just leave. And I was hanging out with some friends, and they said, yeah, you should continue the Alabama Central. That's a really good paint scheme. I like how basic it looks. And I said, okay, sure. Well, you need some rolling stock. Okay, yeah, I need some rolling stock. And I went down the boxcar rabbit hole because it's my favorite car is boxcars. And that's the most common car for a short line to own is boxcars. So I ended up creating a roster, and I said, well, okay, well now I need trackage. And there's a Watco short line in Prattville, Alabama, just probably about 20 minutes away from me here in Montgomery, called the Autauga Northern. And it's just referred to as, for the rail fans, as AUT. AUT is on former Gulf Mobile and Ohio trackage. The trackage technically starts in Montgomery and ends in Maplesville, Alabama. It continued all the way to Tuscaloosa back in the day, but Illinois Central Gulf, when they bought the GM&O, they tore up the line from Tuscaloosa to Maplesville, and they sold the remainder of that line to Norfolk Southern and CSX. NS did like a 50-year lease on their portion to Watco, which created AUT. CSX retains their portion from Montgomery to the paper mill in Prattville. But I didn't want to model CSX and I didn't want to model Watco just because I'm not really a fan of the black and yellow paint scheme on those engines. So I said, okay, well, Watco doesn't exist. CSX sold outright to the Alabama Central, so did Norfolk Southern. That's how we were born. And the line in total is about 75-ish miles with, I guess you would consider it a branch. There's a Y we call it Union Camp. And that's an old GM&O slang that the railroad crew still uses, is Union Camp in Dosterville. But there's a Y and the Y kind of snakes up to IP another 5 miles, and it tracks just abruptly in there at IP, International Paper. And it's an interesting line because there are not a lot of industries on that line. So I kind of understand why CSX and NS really don't pay much attention to it prototypically, and why they gave it over to Watco. But for me, the line has always fascinated me because there's very little left to show it was a GM&O line. There's one bridge going into downtown Prattville that has the GM&O wings still on it. Mm. And there's the Prattville Depot, which, I mean, you've seen the model of that. And I'm pretty sure most of your listeners have seen the model of that who've been to either Colorado, Macon, or St. Louis have all seen the depot.
And if they haven't, we're going to share pictures of that on our website, aroundthelayout.com/208.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that was something that still stands to this day. And there are a couple of whistle posts still roaming around. But the line always fascinated me, and what kind of sealed modeling that portion of the line was there's a group of guys, it's NACOA. They own like Fairmont speeders, high rail trucks, or personal use stuff. They show up on the line once a year to run, and someone would post a YouTube video of running on the entire line on a Fairmont motor car. And I said, okay, yep, that's going to be the line. I can model this section. I don't necessarily need to pay attention here. And it really helped out with prototype information because I can go on Google, I've rail fan the line, but a lot of the line is isolated back in the woods. And there were a lot of questions I had that weren't getting answered. But I was fortunate enough to actually get a chance to ride with the AUT crew on a freight train about 4 or 5 months ago at this point. I got an invite from the management. They said, yeah, we follow the Alabama Central. We love what you're doing. We love the concept. Why don't you come ride with us and they'll answer some questions for you?
Awesome.
So
how cool is that? That's amazing. Yeah.
It was a nighttime run because that's when they run out to Norfolk Southern. And we had a GP38, a GP35, and a GP40-2 in the consist. So if it's basically the EMD catalog from the 60s and 70s we had.
Nice.
And we ran it, and the engineer's talking to me, and he said, yeah, I know you. And I said, well, how do you know me? He's like, well, yeah, I know you from the Alabama Central. I follow it on Facebook. It's great. But I think you took photos of me when I worked for the Meridian and Bigby and the Birmingham Southern back in the day. And I said, well, what year did you work for the MMB and the BS? And he told me, and I started going through my archive, and I said, oh my God, there you are. Yeah, there you are in the cab of that MP15. So nice. It turns out we'd known each other for years. And he just knew me as that one rail fan for some reason that kept showing up at the railroads he worked at. And we've become pretty good friends. And I've got a standing invite to come back out there whenever I want, which is also great to have. But yeah, riding that line, it taught me how the operation works more. I got more into. I've now gotten more into, okay, well, what is the purpose of my boxcar fleet? Where are they going? And I'm channeling my inner Matt Fricks with this. Was I started seeing there are about 3 passing sightings between Prattville and Maplesville in the middle of scenic nowhere. And they had a bunch of BKTY, NS, CSX, LRS cars on it. And I'm like, why are all these UP cars on this track? And they said, these are all a part of the IP pool car fleet. IP leases these cars and they go everywhere. And I said, oh, well, this justifies all the box cars I got now. So I've kind of deleted BKTY off of my version of the IP pool car list and replaced it with the Alabama Central. I still retain the LRS cars and the CSX and the NS just to get some variety in there. But yeah, that was something I really wanted to. That was a change I made recently with it, and then learning that it only takes. We left Prattville at 5:30 p.m. Got to Maplesville by 8, and we were back in Prattville once we interchanged with Norfolk Southern. Set out our cut of cars, picked up a new cut of cars, brake tested, did everything we need to do. We were back in Prattville at the yard office by 1:30 in the morning. And then I turned around and went to work the next morning, and I felt every inch of that day.
I bet, but probably worth every second of dragging the next day. I bet you were flying high about that ride. That's got to be incredible.
It was so awesome. And, getting to take some photos out of the cab of the engine and saying, okay, well, that's a scene I want to model now. And it also taught me that, okay, well, this bridge looks like it's a straight bridge, but it's actually a slight curve. I don't know how to build that, but I'm going to figure it out.
Nice.
And and yet again, it taught me a lot more about the operation.
Before we depart here, I do want to ask you about your approach on paint. We talked about boxcars. Let's talk about power and how you've come up with a scheme that I believe is one of the more plausible when it comes to short line freelance railroading. Talk about how you developed paint schemes and your approach on that aspect for your short line freelance model railroad.
So when it comes to the power, I've always been a fan of rebuilt EMD power. CF7s, Jeep 10s, GP9Rs, stuff like that. And I, yet again, thank God for Facebook. We have Alabama Railroad History as a Facebook group. And there's a gentleman in there named David Harris who has photos of the GM&O and the ICG days of that line. And it showed me, oh, wow, okay, so the Jeep 10s did roll on this line, so did Alco RS1s. Not going the Alco RS1 route because that's a little out of my era, but the Jeep 10s are plausible. So when it comes to the roster is strictly, it's a mixture of because I want it and because I need it. And I do have a couple of GP38s in the works, and I've got those just for the sheer fact of they run between Prattville and Maplesville because you need dynamic brakes. You need that extra power. And you also need PTC. I've to interchange with Norfolk Southern. I found that something about putting PTC on a CF7 feels wrong to me, so I'm not going to do that. So the CF7s have kind of gotten relegated into running between Montgomery and International Paper. Because that's a line that really only has one or two small little transload facilities. So that was something I really wanted to get within. The GP10s run within International Paper. That's the inner plant switching operation and stuff like that. And then, of course, the infamous SW10, which kind of started it all. I can officially put this story to rest because I have people ask about, whatever happened to the SW10. We don't see it anymore. I sold it to the Drayton and Southern. Drayton Blackgrove has it. It's his problem now. It's a cursed engine. He can take care of it. So going back to the paint scheme is actually, I copied that paint scheme, is a copy off the Texas Rock Crusher Railroad. I think it was a TXR was the reporting mark. But I was scrolling through, and that's how I found the CF7 and the SW10s. I was like, wow, that shade of red looks really good. And I've never been out there. I've never rail fanned that line. I just have photos to go off of. And I kind of roughly paint matched true color SP Scarlet Red as close a red as I could possibly get. And, white cab roof, black frame, is pretty self-explanatory from there. But when it comes to looking back now, I kind of think, it's kind of got some GM&O heritage being red. It's not quite GM&O red, but it's close enough. So yeah, I got a little GM&O heritage in there. But then you get the lettering itself. I wanted to do something that was very simplistic, very plausible. And I kind of thought of, okay, what if the railroad was broke? We started with no money. We couldn't afford, like you said, you can't afford to repaint a boxcar at this point, which I do have some new boxcars and some repainted boxcars. And I did that through basically the backstory on that was, interstate commission grant from the state of Alabama, because they've done that to a couple of short lines down here. But the locomotives, though, I wanted them to be looking like they're on their last leg. This is probably the final stop of these engines, just like the boxcars. And I wanted to do some engines that a lot of people see as obsolete, because down here in the Southeast, we were very EMD heavy down here up until a few years ago. You would go to, say, the Bay Line operated nothing but GP38-2s. Meridian and Bigby, on the other hand, owned by the same company at one point, but pre-G&W, operated GP10, GP11s in a single CF7. So it's kind of looking at, okay, you can kind of combine what you like, but you don't need to go crazy. Do I really need 6 CF7s on the line? No, I've got 3. One of which is a parts engine for the other 2 to keep them alive. Same for the Jeep 10s. Do I need 6? No, I've got 2 Jeep 10s, but then I've got 3 GP38-2s, because I learned, especially after riding AUT and riding, I guess you can call it the prototype Alabama Central, I learned that, oh wow, we struggled getting 19 cars from Prattville to Maplesville with 3 locomotives running wide open. Yeah. Oh, I definitely need those engines. Yeah, definitely dynamic brakes are your friend on that line. I'm just going to say that.
This plausibility that you keep mentioning, and we had Chris Palmieri from Home Shops on here. We were talking about plausibility. It seems to me it takes quite a bit of discipline, doesn't it? I mean, there's so much really cool new stuff that comes and hits the market nearly on a daily basis, but you have to set that aside and really discipline yourself, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And going back to Chris, you can blame Chris Palmieri for the state logo. You see the state logo on like my maintenance away vehicles, a lot of my box cars and stuff like that. And that was a couple of years ago. It was when Home Shops first became public, that he was out. He came to St. Louis to the RPM, and Chris into the show. We had talked about the Alabama Central a little during the show, and afterwards, we were going over to Jeff Kubler's house to his L&N layout. It was it's kind of like an after show ritual we have. And I invited Chris to come along with us, and we were sitting down at this Mexican restaurant with all these other L&N modelers. And Chris said, to be well known in the freelance community, you've got to have a logo, you've got to have a brand, but make sure it's your brand. And I said, okay. And I rattled around with that idea. And the state logo there's like 3 different iterations on some paper that I just roughly drawn out, and a friend of mine drew them out in MS Paint or something. And I said, yeah, that's the one. And sure enough, we got the state logo. But you would notice that the state logo isn't necessarily on every single one of our engines. Because I look at it as, this is fairly new to the railroad itself. It's not going to be on everything. It's only going to be on stuff that's recently been rebuilt, repainted, or we sent out to NRE to get rebuilt or remanufactured. It's going to come back with a new state logo. And that's, I kind of go by the philosophy less is more in freelance model railroading, because you can either have something extremely plausible, or you can get out on so many tangents, the railroad becomes so big, it doesn't even seem plausible anymore. You don't need 16 subsidiaries of your one freelance company to make your railroad plausible. And that was something I wanted to focus on.
Well, it seems like the goal, in sense, or maybe one of the goals of having a freelance railroad, is having someone believe that it's actually a real railroad. And I can see from my seat, the Alabama Central, I'll go down to Montgomery or Birmingham or anywhere in between. I'll go looking for it, because it really does seem like that. And it's all because you kept it within, another Matt Frick's reference point, guardrails of realism to a low budget short line railroad. They didn't have a ton of money to do all this stuff. They didn't have money to buy brand new locomotives or even, slightly used locomotives. They're buying what they can afford. They're using what they can afford. I'm sure their rates aren't the greatest, with not a lot of traffic on the line. So revenue is limited, and therefore the budget is limited. And you're definitely taking what I believe is the absolute correct approach on this. It's really wild to see it.
Well, going back to the Colorado trip, riding with Hank Stevens, Hank was suggesting, I can draw up this engine service facility for you. And I said, that's a great idea, but let's hold off on it, especially after seeing where AUT fixes their engines. It is on a random passing siding. There is no shed. There's no nothing. They are working in the dirt. That is their engine service center. There's no fuel racks. That's what I want to keep, because I was like, that is some backwoods railroading right there. That is what I love.
Yeah.
And that was same thing for like the maintenance way vehicles. I do have, because you don't only want to focus on your rolling stock and your locomotives, you want to focus on non-revenue stuff. So in this case, your vehicles, your structures, and stuff like that. And the thing that I realized was AUT has 3 high rail trucks. They have 2 pickup trucks and like some kind of medium duty welding truck. But I noticed they had no track equipment, and these ballast regulators and tampers started showing up on site a couple of months ago. And I said, who owns this? It ain't Watco. So who does all this equipment belong to? It belongs to DR Davis out of Millbrook. That's some railroad contracting company that I had no idea existed. So yet again, playing off the prototype, I've got DR Davis running track maintenance on my railroad just like the prototype does, because we don't need ballast regulators and tampers and stuff when we've got a contractor literally right up the street that can truck it in and do the work for us.
As you learn more about the prototype, it's really cool to see how that's affecting the Alabama Central as a freelance railroad. And there's just so much more we're going to be able to dive into. We're going to get you back on the podcast for sure. We'll talk more about the Alabama Central, more about what you've learned. I'm sure you're going to learn a ton more between now and then, but our time here is drawn to a close. Folks, if you want to learn more about the Alabama Central, check out all the links on our website, aroundthelayout.com/208. And do us a favor, if you like today's episode, share it with a friend. Radisson, thank you so much for coming on Around the Layout podcast and sharing your story about the Alabama Central and your starts in model railroading.
It was great to be here, Ray. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.